Welcome to this Introduction to Music Fundamentals B video, where we'll be examining how to work out what the quality of an interval is. So let's remind ourselves what we learned last semester about intervals. We learned that seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths were major. Okay, all of those intervals that we learned last semester were major intervals. But we also learned that if you raised a major interval by a semitone, it became augmented. If you lowered a major interval by a semitone, it became minor. And if you lowered a minor interval by another semitone, it became diminished. So you could have a major second. If it's raised by a semitone, it becomes augmented second. If a major second is lowered by a semitone, it becomes a minor second. And if a minor second is lowered by another semitone, it becomes diminished. We also learned that fourths, fifths, and octaves are perfect. So we were only dealing with perfect fourths, fifths, and octaves last semester. But we also learned that if you raised a perfect interval by a semitone, it would become augmented. And if you lowered a perfect interval by a semitone, it becomes diminished. So you can have a perfect fifth raised by a semitone becomes augmented. A perfect fifth lowered by a semitone becomes diminished. Now in this particular video, we're going to learn how to work those things out. But a little bit more revision still. Remember that intervals can be melodic. That means the notes follow each other. There's one note, then another note. Or harmonic. That means that the notes are on top of each other. Okay, directly on top of each other. Intervals are always calculated from the lowest note, not necessarily the first note. If the first note is the lowest note, great. But if the second note is the lowest note, that's the note that we calculate from. Remember this, it's very important. Always calculate the interval from the lowest note. Then, when intervals are written in words, the quality comes before the size. So we don't write fourth perfect, we write perfect fourth. Right, so that's a revision of what we learned last semester. So how do we calculate the quality of an interval? Remember last semester you were just working out the size, and once you'd worked out the size, it was automatically a major interval or a perfect interval. Now we've got to work out how to work out if they're minor or major or augmented or diminished. So let's have a look at an example. Look at your screen now and you'll see the first example. We've got two notes, F and B. So let's just go through the normal process of working out the size of this interval. First, we have the names of the two notes, F and B, and we find the lowest note. The lowest note in this case is F. So we start counting on F. F, G, A, B. So we've got a fourth, right? So far, so good. We know this is a fourth, but we don't know if it's perfect or if it's augmented or if it's diminished. So let's see how to work that out. So what is the quality? Is this a perfect fourth, and how do we check? First, we need to find the key signature of the lowest note, okay, in your key table. Remember, the lowest note in this example was an F. So go to the circle of fifths, find F, and then we'll be able to work them out. The next step is to check the highest note of the interval against the same note letter in the scale. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. If the highest note of the interval is the same as the one on the scale, it's major or perfect. In this case, because we're working with a fourth, it will have to be perfect or just perfect or augmented or diminished. So let's have a look at how this works. Here's the first example again, F and B. The lowest note is F, so we have to look for the key signature of F, which is 1 flat, B flat. We write the scale out and we include the flat of the key signature. So there you'll see I've written out F major and I've put in the flat for B flat. All right. Then we compare the second note of the interval with the same letter name note in the scale. So in the scale, there's a B flat, but in the interval, we have a B natural. They are not the same, are they? Now, if they were the same, it would be a perfect fourth. But because they're not the same, we now have to work out, is it an augmented fourth or a diminished fourth? Okay. So let's see. If we look at the second note, it was a B natural. B flat is lower than B natural. Okay, that means that the one that we were dealing with is actually a semitone higher than the scale version. Okay, the scale at a B flat, if we made the B flat one semitone high, it would be B natural, and the B natural is the one that we've got in our example. So fourths can be perfect, augmented, or diminished. If a perfect fourth is raised a semitone, it becomes augmented. And because our one is one semitone higher than the B flat, it's been raised. So this is an augmented fourth. Now, it may sound complicated to you now. Don't panic too much because we're going to do several examples and there are some more examples in your textbook to show how this works. So let's do another example. This example is where the lowest note is not on the key table of your circle of fifths. Okay, so there are always two options to this. The first option is if both notes have the same accidental in front of them, then you can just take the accidentals out. So let's imagine that you've been given the task of finding the quality and the size of this interval, A sharp to C sharp. Now, we can first work out the size because that's quite easy. Let's have a look here. Look at your screen now and have a look before we work out the size if you can see an A sharp. There is no A sharp on this circle, so already we know that there's a bit of a problem. But if we go back to this one, and we see that there are two sharps, an A sharp and a C sharp. If they're both the same accidental, you can simply take the accidentals away from those notes and it would be, the interval still remains the same because basically you are transposing the notes one semitone lower. Don't worry about what I've just said now. Just if you see a sharp and a sharp in an interval, you can take the sharps out and it will still end up being the same interval. Okay, but it only works like that if the accidentals are the same. So if one accidental is a sharp and another accidental is a flat, it won't work. Only will work if there are two sharps or if there are two flats. Okay, so let's work out the interval. The first note is, the first step is to work out the two note names. We know that we've got an A and a C. The lowest note is an A, so we count up from the A. A, B, C, we're working with the third. Then we have to work out the key signature of the lowest note. The lowest note was an A, and that's A major scale. So we write out the A major scale. Remember to write it out without the key signature. So put in the sharps one by one as though you were writing it in manually. If you look at the screen, you'll see that I've written it out for you. Then we compare the interval, the top note of the interval, with the same letter name note in the scale. Okay, so in our interval, we've got an A and a C. C is the highest note. If we look in the written out scale, we'll see there's a C sharp. All right, so the notes are not the same, so this is not a major third. All right, now, is C natural higher or lower than C sharp? Anything with a sharp in front of it has been made higher. So the C natural is actually lower. Okay, and if we know that seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths, they can be major. If they're made a little bit smaller, one semitone smaller, they are minor intervals. This has been made one semitone smaller, so it is a minor third. Okay, just remember the C sharp is one semitone higher than the C natural of our interval. So that interval would be a minor third. So basically just remember this. If you see an interval and the lowest note does not reflect on the circle of fifths, don't worry. In your first option, you can check if both notes have sharps or both notes have flats in front of them. If they do, you just take the flats or the sharps away and then work out the interval as you normally do. But if you ask that question and only one of the notes has an accidental, then we have to use a different option. Okay, so look at your screen now, and you'll see that the example is A sharp to E. We already know that A sharp does not reflect on the circle of fifths, but the second note doesn't have a sharp with it as well. So we can't do what we did with option 1. We can't just take the sharps away. In this case, we have to do something called enharmonic transposition. That sounds like a mouthful, but it's actually quite easy. What we're basically doing is finding the enharmonic notes of both of these notes and writing them down. So the enharmonic note for A sharp, the note which is exactly the same as A sharp but with another letter name, is B flat. B flat and A sharp are exactly the same. So we write out B flat. Okay? We do the same for the second note. E is also F flat. So we write out F flat. Now we've got a new interval, B flat to F flat. It's exactly the same as the A sharp to E because they're enharmonics. It just looks different. But the most important thing is that B flat, the lowest note, is on the circle of fifths. So now we can calculate the quality of the interval. So let's work it out. To work out the size of the interval, we need the letter names, which are B flat and F flat. The lowest note is B flat. So let's work it out. B, C, D, E, F. We're working with a fifth. All right. So we've got the size. Now, write out the B flat major scale. Go to your circle of fifths. You see B flat has got 2 flats. So let's write them out. B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat. Remember, if the first note is a flat or a sharp, the last note of the scale must also be a flat or a sharp. So I've written out the key signature. Take a look at your screen now. We are going to compare the top note of the interval with the same letter note name in the scale. So the top note of the interval is an F flat. So we look for an F in the scale, and we see that it does have an F, but that it's F natural. Now, is F flat higher or lower than F natural? The flat is always lower than a natural, so we know that this fifth is smaller. It's a lower than perfect. So a fifth that is smaller than a perfect fifth is a diminished fifth. So we're working with a diminished fifth. See, it's quite simple to work it out. You've just got to think very carefully about what we're doing. Now, we also get intervals that are sometimes bigger than an octave. We've only been dealing with intervals that are an octave so far, but we can get intervals that are bigger. And thankfully, this is very, very simple. So the first thing you do when you have an interval that is greater than an octave is that you transpose one of the notes, just one of them, up or down an octave. So let's have a look at the interval that we have on the screen now. We've got an E flat and a much higher A. Now, for this particular example, I've just brought the A down an octave. You see, if you look at the screen, you'll see I've taken it down an octave. But you could equally have taken the E flat up an octave too. It would have amounted to the same thing. One of the notes must come up or down an octave. And then you work it out as you normally do. So let's have a look. If we take the first note, E flat, and that is also the lowest note. So let's calculate the interval. E, F, G, A. It's a fourth. All right. Remember, E flat is the lowest note, but it's also the first note. So we've got a fourth. Now, we've got to work out if this is a perfect fourth or an augmented fourth or diminished fourth. Go to your circle of fifths, look for E flat. E flat has 3 flats, B flat, E flat, and A flat. Immediately there should be a bell ringing there because we know we're working with an A natural, but the key signature has an A flat, right? So if the key signature has an A flat and we're working with an A natural, natural is higher than flat. So this means that we're working with an augmented fourth because a perfect fourth, it would have been A flat and we're working with an A natural. Natural is higher than flat. So it's an augmented fourth. Then, once you've worked out the size of the interval, all you need to do is add the word compound before the augmented fourth. Compound says that we're working with an interval that's bigger than an octave. Okay? So the only thing we add for those intervals that are bigger than an octave is the word compound, and that gives us the correct answer. Now, just for abbreviation's sake, and if you want to use these, you can. Otherwise, you can simply just write perfect, major, minor, and so forth. In jazz, often what musicians do is use these little symbols for the naming of intervals. So a triangle, for example, is used for major intervals. A minus sign is used for minor, plus sign for augmented, and the word dim, D-I-M, for diminished. So if you wanted to write major third, you could write triangle 3. That is perfectly legitimate. But you can also write something like P4. That means perfect fourth. Or capital M3. Or small m7. That would be minor 7th. Okay? Just make sure that your capitals and your small letters are very clear to see the difference between. Okay? Otherwise, write mine or mage. And that's where we end today's lecture.